Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. My name is Marcella Dukley. I am the head of workplace strategy and innovation here at Charter. Welcome to today's Charter Skill Accelerator on hybrid readiness. For those of you who don't know Charter, we are a future of work, media, and research company. And if you are curious or if that got you a little bit excited, you can read more about us on charterworks.com. While you're there, I also encourage you to check out two very interesting things. The first is Charter Pro, which is our newly launched subscription for people leaders at organizations. And the second is our upcoming Charter Workplace Summit. So it's a conference that's being held both virtually and in person in New York City, and this is happening on October 26th. This year, our focus at the conference is the new people first paradigm. So go ahead, take a look, sign up. I look forward to seeing you there either live or IRL. But today, we are very proud to host the Charter Skills Accelerator, which is a workshop series that we run focused on vital skills that will help you advance your career and help you lead in a way that is aligned with your values. This is brought to you free of charge thanks to our very generous and gracious partners, LifeLabs Learning and BrandLive. And before I hand you over to the very amazing Megan Wheeler, who is from LifeLabs Learning and our workshop leader today, we'll have a very brief message from Sam Colbert-Heil, who is the CEO at BrandLive.
We're thrilled to sponsor this series with LifeLabs Learning and Charter, and hope that it's a shining example of what's possible. Because let's face it, everyone is bored out of their minds with talking heads and little boxes. At BrandLive, we're injecting a little bit of soul into this thing we're calling hybrid work. Whether it's a webinar series like this one, your biggest marquee event of the year, a new hire onboarding series, or your next town hall. We're reinventing how companies and leaders communicate and teaching them to use video so that these moments look and feel like the television and TikToks we're watching outside of work each and every day. Because the key to making sure your audience doesn't tune out is to make it so good they'll tune in. We hope you enjoyed today's show, and thanks for joining us.
That's a wrap. Nice job, everyone.
Thank you, Sam. And now it is my pleasure to introduce you to Megan Wheeler, who is the Director of Facilitation at LifeLabs Learning. I just first need to say that you are in excellent hands. I spent almost 6 years of my life at LifeLabs Learning, and so it's a very full circle moment to be here today. Megan is somebody who I've learned so much from. Any sort of real talent that you see in my facilitation skills can somewhat be accredited to her. She was a coach and a mentor, and she continues to be a friend. So again, you are in amazing hands. But Megan is going to lead us through hybrid readiness. Over to you, Megan.
Hey everyone, I am Megan Wheeler. I am the Director of Facilitation at LifeLabs. I just had to take a deep breath for a moment because I just felt like it was going to be a gush fest between me and Marcella for the next hour, but I promise there's going to be some good content coming at you. So my background is in organizational psychology. I have been personally studying for both selfish reasons and for really thinking about where the future of work is going. I've been looking at distributed teams, hybrid readiness for about 6 years in my research. So I'm super excited to be here today. I really want to make this meaningful for you. And so as we really think about what we even mean by hybrid readiness, I want to get a sense. I think there's around 60 to 70 folks in the session right now of how you are personally defining hybrid. This is a great place to just get a baseline. So we are going to launch a poll. So hybrid can mean that you sometimes go into the office, sometimes you're home. That would be hybrid. Sometimes you may be fully remote at all times, or you may be someone who is in the office at all times, but there are remote people who work with you. So would love for you to cast your vote in the poll below. That'll just get some numbers for me to know how we're working in the session today and where I can really gauge the conversation. Once you take that poll, I will get some of the results sent back to me, so I'll get a sense of what we're working with. So you'll find that poll if you just scroll below. And when you take that, I'll get the results and we can start to see where we are working from. Just by way of background, I personally was working as a consultant around 2016. So sometimes going into clients' offices, sometimes going into our office. And then around 2018, I went fully remote. So either I was at home or I was in clients' offices. And so they really did kind of force us at LifeLabs Learning to really think about what we meant by hybrid, what we meant by how we're working together. Okay, so it does seem like around 67% of us or so sometimes go into the office, sometimes work from home, and around 33, 1/3 of us are fully remote. So that's really going to be a helpful lens for me. A couple of just things I want to just mention as we go forward is I am going to try to make this as conversational as possible. I am going to be asking for some of your thoughts, some of your questions, some of your inputs as we go throughout the session today. So I'll be kind of prompting you to go into the chat. I'll be opening the floor for questions. And even if at some points I don't pause to take your questions, but something pops up, I very much welcome you to put it into the chat. I'll try to get to it and answer it at some point in time. So as we have an understanding of what we mean by hybrid, I think it does help because we can start to see some of the benefits and some of the problems. And that's really where I want to guide our conversation today. So you can see this lovely canary here. And while I hate this idiom, I think it is helpful to really think about what happens with hybrid problems as they help to inform us. So it is kind of like that canary in a coal mine situation. We've got hybrid problems or we've got distributed team problems. And that really starts to become an indicator that these are problems that we need to solve no matter what. In preparing for the conversation today, I was just chatting with Marcella around, like, what do you think people really want to know about this hybrid readiness? And Marcella had a great point of really thinking about the future of work. So at LifeLabs Learning and at Charter, one of the things that are super top of mind for us is how do we share information? How do we focus on skill development that will help us in the future of work? So hybrid work isn't just a for now fix. It's not a Band-Aid on our 2020 problem. It really is where we're going. And so one of the things that we can start to see in terms of the problems that are showing up in these hybrid situations is it becomes sort of the small indicator of these bigger problems that are happening company-wide. Here's what I mean by that. So we can look at the sense of exclusion pain. People either actually get left out of conversations or maybe they suspect or they think that they've been left out. Research actually shows that the sense of exclusion pain maps into our neural pathways in the exact same way that physical pain does. It actually hurts. So this has a huge impact on productivity and engagement. I actually had a situation like this just this week where someone who was working remotely, someone on my team, but she's working in another time zone. She's 6 hours ahead right now. So she's not in a lot of the conversations that are happening synchronously. So there's this sense of her being left out of conversations. And that's something that I'm going to talk a little bit about today in terms of skills. The second is this sense of back channeling. What I love about this is I actually want to create some kind of fun TikTok video to demonstrate what would it be like if all in-person meetings looked like they do when they're all remote. All of those DMs, those direct messages, all of the sharing of links in the chat, all of the sharing of screenshots that are taken, the distractions that can happen in the back chat channel virtually can also happen in those meetings after meetings. So if we're in the office and we have a meeting for an hour, what happens in those conversations walking back from the meeting? So that back channeling becomes a bigger problem for both fully distributed as well as in person. The wheel spinning. So this is the sense that we start to see poor productivity or missed deadlines or dropped balls simply because there wasn't clarity on who's owning what those next steps are. So it really becomes a challenge that's easily fixed with some simple solutions that I'll cover today. And then the diminisher effect. This is a big one that we see with hybrid dynamics. What do I mean by that? This simply means that rather than the multiplier effect, that 1 + 1 = 3, we're really looking at that 1 + 1 = -3. So just in the chat, based off of what I've shared, just put a Y if anything that I just shared resonates, you've felt this, you've seen some of this happening at your company. Put a Y into the chat. And I see a great question from Nick as well, as in terms of what comes next. I really would love to talk more about what's coming next once we really look at the problems that exist now. So Nick, I'm going to come back to your question and really look at the types of technology, even integrating AI. That's like a new passion subject of mine, and how we then use that going forward in our hybrid dynamics. So most of us have experienced something along these lines or had additional challenges when it comes to looking at all of the company problems that can exist. But if we think about it rather than these company problems, we can really look at it in terms of problem prevention. Really meaning if we know that these things can exist easily for both in-person, fully distributed, and especially hybrid situations, then we can start to apply some solutions. As a guess, there's a little bit of this data coming into the opening slides, but if we think about who here would prefer a hybrid model out of employees. So this data out of Accenture, they first were polling in 2021, results were published in 2022. So they were looking at how many employees really wanted a hybrid work model. Mentally take a guess of what you think people would say. And here's what we saw. Most people actually like the sense of hybrid work. Tiffany had it pretty darn close, same with Ken. So this sense of really thinking of the flexibility of hybrid work. That's the key, is where do we have that sense of flexibility? But when we think about flexibility, this can also create problems for the company. We aren't used to working this way. We don't have structures necessarily that are put into place to allow for it. So in the same study, they wanted to see from executives, from CEOs, who said they were ready for this? Who said, yep, bring on the hybrid work. We have the structures and systems in place to make this accessible. The result was this. About 1/4 of companies said that they were ready, so they could take it on. So if we think about this, it means that if we're not setting up the structure, if we're not thinking about some of the simple practices, we could really be kind of setting ourselves up for failure in the sense of exclusion, friction, disengagement, and underperformance. So not only does that have a human impact, but that has a very big business impact as well. Here's the good news. What I will share with you today comes from several years of research from LifeLabs. So if this is your first exposure to LifeLabs Learning, a little bit about us and what we do is we offer training to managers and teams that are both in person or distributed. When we work with teams on a regular basis, we get access to a lot of data. I've been sharing some of my research and some of our research at LifeLabs, really looking at what are those skill sets that we needed before we were distributed, we especially needed when it was happening, and again, going into the future. So going into one of those initial questions, I think for Nick, what you mentioned is really what does the future look like? I'm really excited to share that I think what the future looks like is really doubling down on the people skills. I don't think the technology is going to be as important as the human skills that will allow us to utilize whatever technology comes in front of us. And what we see from research is that these leadership skills, these people skills, these connection skills, These are the skills that are really going to be helpful no matter what kind of future we are holding in front of us. And so I think I'll just add in this other quick note here. Because we have personal experience at LifeLabs of being hybrid, we're also going to share a couple of our own kind of fun stories and where this has worked. I'll share some client stories as well, but really looking at how do we find the benefit of the skills that we're going to talk about today. So one of the things that we talk about at LifeLabs is how do we take complexity or even things that seem really simple and break them down into skills that are super easy to transfer. And so what I'd like for you to do today is really focus on these two main skills of hybrid readiness. It seems pretty simple. We're going to look at communication and we're going to look at connection. But if we really break it down, I want to focus on the skill sets that will help us in each of these buckets. So by the time you walk out of our session today, you should have 6 easy to implement skills that can really help you double down where you spend your energy as a manager, as an organization. And so when we look at this from a sense of the LifeLabs perspective, when we look at this from the sense of simplifying complexity, what you will walk away with is the vocabulary to put these into habits. So you'll be able to notice some of the areas that may feel blurry or hard to define or hard to pinpoint in how your organization is currently operating. And instead, you'll have some skills to put into practice. You'll have some easy things that you can do that are research backed to be able to immediately apply. After the session, we'll be able to share our tools, the templates, the slides from today, so you can take them back to your company, you can share them, and you can easily implement them as we go. So from what I'm sharing already, going into focusing on communication, focusing on connection, curious if you want to put into the chat, I signed up for this and I was really hoping we would talk about something else. Go ahead and share that with me here, and I'll see if there's places where I can integrate that. If you think, the thing that I really wanted to talk about today, what I really wanted to learn, doesn't really seem like it's going to fall into the bucket of communication or connection, I invite you to put it into the chat, and I will very intentionally try to get to that as we go throughout. All right. So in some of the questions that we have, Evelise is talking about a manager who is hands-off, so almost the exact opposite of that micromanager. It almost feels like it's really hard to build trust, but also know how to be productive. So I'm actually going to talk maybe a little bit into that in terms of both communication and connection. And to CJ's point, we will be talking about specific tools. So yes, my goal today is to really give us a sense of pulling out some of the tools and the skills that we teach in our programs to make your life easier to be able to implement these faster. Okay, cool. So Minnie and Tiffany, I will build in some of the challenges that we can expect, both from communication and connection, as well as some of the structures to put into place. So let's rock and roll as we go forward. I'm going to come back to the chat in a little bit. All right, focusing on communication. Communication probably feels like an obvious one when it comes to not being in the same place. But I actually want to go through a little bit more in terms of guessing those problems. So if somebody was interested, like what are the actual challenges around hybrid work that come into place? So I'm going to pause here. I'm going to slow down. In terms of communication specifically, I've already seen a couple of problems shared. Somebody may have a manager who's super hands-off. They actually don't hear from the manager. So there's like a gap in communication, a lack of communication. What are some of the other potential problems that you have noticed in hybrid communication? Julie Farmer is bringing out a point that I definitely want to highlight in terms of new teams. So much change in the past year in terms of maybe losing some folks from our team, getting some new ones. We're probably interacting with people that we don't know their style. Not only is that in the interdependence of two people, but now we have team dynamics. So we could even bring in some of that Tuckman's forming, storming, norming, and performing work. Going into how do I really understand what people want, what their expectations are. So I think we all have some of this experience. I'm seeing a lot of this kind of come up in terms of the problems, and we're getting them. So if we think about this in terms of some general problems that we see, we're going to do a quick experiment just to feel this out in the room. So if you have a piece of paper available, some of us may not have that because we just have our laptop and our computers in front of us, but it can literally be a scrap sheet of paper, but just something that you'd be comfortable recycling or throwing away when we are done. I invite you to grab a piece of paper and close your eyes. I won't be taking questions. I won't be looking at the chat for this, but I'd love for you to grab that piece of paper and close your eyes. And no peeking. All right, so I would love for you to take that piece of paper and fold it in half. Tear off the upper right-hand corner. Fold your paper in half again. Tear off the upper left-hand corner. Fold your paper in half again. Tear off the lower right-hand corner. Unfold your paper. You can open your eyes, and let's take a look at what I was hoping our result would look like. Now, while I can't see your pieces of paper, what I can put together is that a lot of this exercise, probably caused some frustration. Some of us gave up midway through. Some of us didn't have the paper, so you just watched me read instructions for the last few seconds. But no matter where we were, there's a lot that can relate to the sense of hybrid workplace. I saw some of this in chat, right? So we didn't have the ability to ask me questions throughout. I had no way in a synchronous form of saying, hey, this is what I meant by top left corner. This is where I wanted you to fold. And so we've done this exercise in a number of our sessions in the past. We have a workshop around managing distributed teams where we actually run this exercise, and it's hilarious to physically see the different ways that people end up with the exact same simple instructions. So to me, I have taught this a number of times. I've looked through my instructions. They seemed clear, but yet still, we're likely to have different results. And while this is really silly, this can really quickly make a very visceral and visual point of how easily communication can break down. So let's talk a little bit about those problems. Somebody was like, yes, I want to hear about those challenges for now and in the future of hybrid work. These are the things I want us to focus on, and then we'll talk about how to address them. So the first hybrid problem that we see, you can see in this image, is that tilted head effect. Just means the lack of quick feedback loops. If we are all in person together, sharing a physical space, I can tap you on the shoulder. I can see what's happening. When you respond to me shortly, or you don't respond at all because you're in a meeting, I understand what's going on. This is around paralinguistic communication. Those quick ahas, those nonverbals, the head nodding, the head tilt when confused. These are these really slight signals that as humans, we have evolved to be able to pick up on. This is how we communicate with each other. And so when they're gone, when we don't have them, it's hard to tell quickly if you're understanding what I'm saying, if you're getting it. I may cut an explanation short because I just see that you're following it. Or maybe I can tweak as I go. Even this workshop right now, this event can get very meta because while I can't see you, I can't pick up on some of these paraverbals that you might be giving me to say, hey, Megan, slow down or tell me more about some of these topics. If we're communicating asynchronously, I could end up writing a message that's way too long, or maybe it's confusing, or maybe I didn't realize I actually needed more information. So the impact is that we spend a lot more of our brain time and our cognitive work trying to understand and decipher messages. What did this person actually mean? The second problem that we have with hybrid work is there's an uneven distribution of knowledge. Sometimes this is simply we forget to inform folks. What do I mean by this? This can happen whether we are sharing a physical space or not. Some folks can share a location and still we forget to inform them. Where this gets exacerbated is when some folks are all together, some folks are remote, and especially if there are different time zones. So this is something that we see, for example, is that when we have a lot of communication happening when other people are fast asleep. So they aren't a part of the decision making. And maybe they have to just know where to get some of that conversation. These are all unintended consequences, but they also can start to breed a lot of inequity when it comes to decision making in terms of where people are getting access to information or even being thought of and sought in terms of participating and soliciting. So in our research at LifeLabs Learning, we've also seen that often in satellite offices or in other offices, people are convinced and sometimes are out of the loop in terms of consideration for project work or moving things forward. The third challenge here that we see is around the lack of context. So there's two ways I think this is really important. One is the why are we doing this again? I truly don't even understand what this links up to. In our strategic thinking workshop, this is one of the biggest things that we hear from leaders and what we teach managers is the context is important. Context is key. Constantly sharing the context can be really helpful just to remember and understand the meaning behind it. As we go into the future of work, if we don't understand the why we're being asked to do something, it's going to impact our sense of meaning and our sense of motivation. The other one is that sense of silence. I felt this myself in the past week. Maybe I would G-chat a colleague and I wouldn't hear back for a day. All right, was this person silent because they didn't see my message? Was this person silent because they were thinking about how to respond? Was this person silent because they just agreed with me and I could move forward with my idea? Or maybe there was dissent, or maybe there's something else completely and entirely. All of this can be really helpful to keep in mind when we think about addressing these problems. The one that I'm going to focus on in terms of course correcting is around unclear norms. If we can start to solve for these unclear communication norms, we can start to make an impact on our feedback loops, distribution of knowledge, and our lack of context. So this is where I want to see and get some conversation going as we start to share some of the tips. So here are our tips for today. Here's how to fix. If only it was this easy, and if only this was the truth, then I think that we would all not be in this session today. But the reality is that unfortunately, in a lot of the companies that we've worked with, and a lot of places where we are, and we've all experienced this, these are really common hybrid fixes that we see. Maybe in other workshops or conversations, this is what is suggested. Instead, this isn't going to be our focus for today. While these are nice to have, again, I want to simplify the complexity and I want to offer some actual tangible tools that can be helpful and immediately applied going forward. So let's look at those actual fixes. I'm going to share 3 in the sense of communication. The first is to co-create communication norms. A few of you mentioned you have new teams. You're kind of in that forming phase. I know for myself as a manager, we went through a little bit of a reorg, and I have a couple of new people on my team. The first thing I recommend to any new teams that are being built, or if you think to yourself, if there's one person that you are collaborating with now that you weren't collaborating with even 3 months ago, this would be an amazing place to start, is to co-create your communication norms. It is just as simple as that. So for example, in my last one-on-one, I said, okay, how do you want to communicate with each other? If it's urgent, do we want to use Slack or GChat? Do we want to use email? Do we want to have a capture system of some kind? And one of the things that I've recommended with managers from the beginning is that once we have a communication norm that is co-created, we actually start to solve a lot of those little urgent things that happen throughout the week. Here's an example. A previous manager that I was working with, they hadn't done manager training before. They kind of thought, okay, we can kind of figure it out. We just want to use some management best practices. But what they had never done is had weekly one-on-ones with their managers and their direct reports. And one of the first things that they noticed once they went through some training, understood how to have some one-on-ones, put the cadence into the calendar, is a lot of those little shoulder taps, the pings, the GChats, the Slacks, they started to get consolidated. Unless they were actual fires, actual emergencies, they could just get put into that one-on-one doc. But if we don't have some of the pausing or some of the co-creation of this to begin with, then it can be really challenging to see where do we begin? How do we have some of these conversations? So what I recommend is co-create these norms. Really bring these to your team. If you're a manager, bring these to your direct reports. If you have a manager, really take the time to make sure that the things that we feel are implicit, how we communicate, what we expect, is also explicit with the people that we're working with. This is especially true when we're working across distance and different cultures. The second thing that I'll share here might seem really obvious, but it's what we call the ABC rule. Always be capturing. In grad school, I had a professor who sort of coined a similar term that was SOS, save often stupid, in the sense that we need to constantly be capturing, saving what we're talking about. Many of us are in meetings, many of us are working asynchronously, and many of us are actually working across time zones. So we need to have a way that we're constantly capturing information. A couple of things that I've seen helpful in this. So think of all of the meetings that you have on your calendar that are reoccurring. Maybe they're weekly, maybe they're daily, maybe they're bi-monthly. We all have some meetings that happen on a regular basis. Those are the best meetings to start thinking about optimizing. What are the agendas that can just be set? Meaning there's a template version of this agenda that we just need to iterate on, and we know where it's captured, and we know that if we miss that meeting, we can go back to it. The other thing I would add is see where you can start to capture who's facilitating that meeting, who's running that meeting. There's probably an opportunity to rotate who that meeting facilitator is, and there's probably an opportunity to rotate who's note-taking during those meetings. It shouldn't just be an in-person person, and it shouldn't be just a remote person. That's an opportunity to think about inclusion and rotate those roles. If we have an agenda that is reoccurring, it's an easy place to just capture those names of the people who come to the meeting and see how you can rotate them going forward. This is super helpful to get people to align on what's being addressed, what those action items are. So for example, in my meetings, we use Google Docs quite often, and our action items are usually that person is tagged. So they'll get a reminder of that action item. Once that action item is complete by that person, they will go back to that same agenda in the Google Doc, cross out that item so we can still see it in the next meeting, but we can also see that that item was already taken care of. Curious if there are other capturing tips that you all have seen, insights you've learned when it comes to the ABC rule. This is a great opportunity to share with others some of the habits that you have created. What are some examples that you have? This is where I really want to learn more, and just in terms of, Nick's mentioning a bad habit is recording team meetings. I want to learn more from that, like getting into the rich data of that, Nick, of what has made that necessarily a bad habit. What would you optimize in terms of going forward? Something that we have done is even in the hopes of shrinking meeting time or removing meetings at all, is thinking of where can I send a recording talking through something. Sometimes meetings are just updates. And if that's the case, is there another way that we can think about capturing those updates without it being a meeting? Taylor, I love tools like Monday.com. Yes, so it looks like Kayla and Mona both using kind of the same Google Doc for all the meetings. That way the inputs are already there. And Stephanie is getting into the sense of, I may be wrong in terms of what I'm reading here. This is me getting meta in my head as I'm like, well, am I understanding what Stephanie is communicating in this chat around the end of meetings with lots of communication implications, capturing what needs to be shared and with whom and who will own what? So this is what I think is really cool about this, is that even in the act of being explicit about how we are capturing our communication, we're creating opportunities for connection. We're creating opportunities to get voices in the room. And some of the things that I'll share around connection is, where can we, in our synchronous spaces, in things like meetings, start to create opportunities for connection, to create opportunities to hear more from folks. There's a ton of research around equity when it comes to hearing voices, is that if we create spaces, psychological safe spaces, where we are asking for people's input at certain points in time, we will have a better product as a result of that communication to begin with. All right, cool. I love these tips. The third tool that I will share around communication is the context statements. I probably could spend an hour talking about context statements in itself. And it is just as simple as sharing what the context is. There's a couple of other ways we can really get into it, but this is a game changer. And what do I mean by that? What we see particularly in distributed teams, and particularly in teams that have some folks in an office and some folks remote, is they don't have the background information to really understand where something is coming from. They don't understand why something matters. In things that are rapidly changing, like all of us are working in an environment like that right now, people want to have input, and they don't know what's already been considered. They don't know when they're going to have an opportunity to share their input going forward. So you can model this habit simply by asking for context and teaching leaders to do the same. Other ways of thinking of doing this are sharing more about the context. I mention it because a fun tip is that when we teach folks how to facilitate workshops or events, we also tell them to mention, this is important because, I mention this because. The reason this is helpful is because. And so just again, to have my meta moment on the context statements, the reason that context statements are so helpful, the reason I mention them is because they open the door to availability in terms of information for folks who weren't in all of those other conversations. And this is one of the biggest takeaways that we see in our Behaviors of Inclusion workshop. People will even follow up with us 6 to 12 months later and say, this was the one thing that I really found helpful in terms of being able to share some of the background on decision making. So the takeaway here with communication is think of context statements as this tag. Challenge yourself going forward. Can I just share one of these statements in every sentence when I'm communicating with my team? All right, so let's end this section with a little bit of a score for yourself. You do not need to share this with others. But looking at the 3 tools that we covered so far today, you can give yourself a score on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being not so hot, 10 meaning doing this really well, don't need to improve on this at all. Wherever you score yourself in each of these areas, find the lowest score. And that should be the one place you focus on when it comes to communication. Ken here is saying, well, sometimes the context is really confidential or delicate. What I might recommend here, Ken, is just acknowledging that the reason that we put a lot of thought into coming up with this decision. And while we may not be able to share all of the data that went into making this decision, here's what I can share. And so try to find some of the, well, I can't share this, here's what I can share. That alone is more context for folks than just assuming that maybe a decision was made and things weren't thought of. Or here's when we'll have another update for you. That can be really helpful to sort of remove some ambiguity or the stories that people start to make up when they don't have that context going forward. All right. So this was all around communication. Our next section is around connection. And so these are really the things that we're going to focus on that can make a big impact really fast. If we really think about connection, there are a couple of things I want to focus on with this. I'll probably spend about 10 more minutes on this section before going back to Marcella to close out our hour today. What I love thinking about when it comes to connection is thinking about humans and our behavior. How did we get to this way? How did we evolve to even think about needing that sense of connection? And this is really where I want to pinpoint the hybrid problem. If many of us, 1/3 of us here today, are fully remote, we maybe often feel that sense, that lack of connection. Maybe we feel the lack of connection with work, but we see it in other places in our life, or maybe there have been intentional places while we're at work that we've started to feel the sense of connection. Why this is a problem. So we as humans, we are wired to track this in-group, out-group dynamic. What do I mean by that? That simply means that when we are close, when we are proximally similar, it creates a sense of liking. So when we have distance between us, it starts to just trigger exclusion. This is a very natural phenomena. We see this in psychology. We see this in why some of our best friends from university may be some of the folks that shared dorms with us because we physically were crossing them in the hallways. Same thing goes to work. Many of us have good friends from work that we just collaborated with often. If we are not creating that sense of togetherness, if we don't have synchronous points in time that we are connecting, it can start to feel like we're not a part of the team. So again, here are some great fixes for this connection problem. But unfortunately, we know that this doesn't work. We need some tangible skills. We need some things to focus on. So here are 3 of our hybrid fixes. These are ones that I've seen at LifeLabs work for us. I've seen work with clients, and I want to share a couple of stories in terms of how they've been implemented. The first is a sense of synchrony. What do I mean by synchrony? It really truly means finding those moments where even though we know that we are way more productive in a flexible way of arranging where I can do my best work during the time of day that works best for me, and sometimes we can collaborate together as organizations that are effective in this space. They have focused on finding synchrony. Maybe that means something more macro. We all take breaks at the same time. We all have company holidays at the same time. So when we come back from the weekend, when we come back from a longer weekend, we all can relate to that same sense of rest or time away from work. A fun one that I've seen some companies work with is creating a team Spotify playlist. So while we may be in 3 different time zones, in multiple different locations, we can all say, hey, it's our Monday Spotify playlist. Let's add 1 song into it. And that's what we're going to be jamming out to this week. There is some sense of togetherness, even if we're working on different things in different ways. And sometimes it's just as simple as the powerful sense of having cameras on. So this is one of our biggest recommendations for teams that are hybrid is have 1 person, 1 screen. So this is a visual that I think is pretty helpful to depict this. Even though there's a conference room of people, they could all be talking to each other, and there may be moments where their head would be up from their screen and they are connecting with each other in the room. They're also making sure that they're focusing on the people that are remote. So there's 1 person, 1 screen. This can create some sort of echo when it comes to volume. So what I would recommend is having a Jabra speaker or some kind of shared speaker. Everybody else is muted during that time. The goal is to create as similar of an experience and similar audio no matter where people are coming in from. The second tool I'll offer here is around breaking the plane. There is a sports analogy for this in terms of in football, really getting over the line here. But removing sports from this, we also see this in the sense of working virtually. We want to break the plane and break it early, build in that chatter. So this is what I mentioned earlier around that communication sense. Some of you mentioned trying to close meetings with a summation statement, or we're going to go around the room and create some kind of actions that we're each going to take. If we can break the plane earlier on in a meeting, even if it's something as similar as a poll, what we did to begin this event, it starts to invite thoughts, invite conversation. Some of the research that we've seen in this space, one of my favorites is around Atul Gawande, really looking at inviting some of the conversation in early on in surgeries. So what he saw is when doctors and nurses went around and just said their names, they saw a reduction in preventable deaths by around 30%. Because what it did is it invited those conversations in to be able to speak out. So what we see is when we have small doc invited in, it builds trust, it builds team connection, and it begins to make those team meetings much more effective. The last tip I'll share here is around ritualizing quality one-on-ones. I mentioned earlier around communication. One-on-ones are not just a communication tool, they are a connection tool. Many of us might feel this. The only time that we may have to slow down, take deep breaths, connect with other humans is during one-on-ones. And so one of the biggest tips I can offer is ensure that your managers have been trained to have effective one-on-ones. Have them trained to know what questions to ask. Have them trained to know what kind of agenda to use. Have them trained to know how to solicit more input from the people that they're managing. And if we can start to ritualize the quality of these one-on-ones, we start to see an impact in terms of connection. In the meantime, an easy thing might be to share some of your favorite one-on-one questions. And actually, we can just do that in this room right now. If there was a one-on-one opening question that you wanted to share with this group, what would it be? In the meantime, Ken, it's Atul Gawande. Yeah, so Alyssa, keeping it general, how are you feeling? Or even how are you feeling today? That can really get into that context. How was your weekend? Something around one of my favorites lately was, what are you binging on with Netflix right now? What are you most proud of? What was a small win from this week? Jessica's bringing in, if it's a new one-on-one, what do I need to know about working with you or your team? If you're familiar with the researcher Brene Brown, she's really known for having her 2-word check-in. So she goes around the room, everybody just gives 2 words to kind of share how they're feeling in that moment. It's similar to what I think Lelde is mentioning of how are you coming into this meeting? Just give 2 words. So what we're doing again is we're breaking the plane. We're starting to ritualize quality one-on-ones. As we wrap with the connection slide, what I'd love for you to focus on is in those 3 elements I spoke with, create synchrony. Maybe this is having shared company holidays. Maybe it's having shared time together, one face, one screen, a shared playlist, shared Slack channels, shared spaces. Maybe it's breaking the plane. So what do you want to do going into your team meetings from this conversation around really inviting some of that conversation in early? Or maybe you want to think about ritualizing the quality of your one-on-ones. Do people need training around this? Do we need just better questions that we're sharing with one another? And so as we think about this, I want to cover the summary of these 2 essential points. In hybrid readiness, there are 2 main areas of work that I want us to focus on when it comes to our skills: communication and connection. There were 3 for each. So around communication, we want to co-create those communication norms, simply meaning in new teams, in one-on-ones, or even if people we've already been working on, how are we going to communicate with each other synchronously and asynchronously? Let's align on those things. There's the conversation of user manuals that came up of if we all know how we prefer to communicate, it makes it a lot easier to be able to engage with one another. Always be capturing where and how are we capturing items from conversations and decisions that are made. And can I improve on my context statements? Sharing this is what matters. This is why I'm bringing this up. This is how we came to this decision. Around connection, create moments of synchrony, create places for synchrony. Break the plane and ritualize quality one-on-ones. And if any of these tools were helpful for you today, then I definitely want to recommend and invite you to conversations with our consultants to really see how we might bring more of this into your organization. So I've got 2 more asks from you before I hand you back to Marcella, who's got some important updates for coming up sessions. I'd love your feedback on the session from today. This will be feedback not only from me, I will read each and every one of these pieces of feedback, but this also will be really helpful for us to know what are some of the topics that you want to hear more of? What are some of the things that are still top of mind for you? And if you want to reach out to one of our consultants, this will also help you. So you will see the link in the chat for this, but it's simply lifelabsfeedback.com/partner events. I want to give you a few moments to please fill out that feedback. Let us know what you're taking away from today. How did I do? And if you have questions for us, you're very much welcome to contact us at events at LifeLabs Learning, but that feedback form, we can also get your information there. So with that, I bid you adieu, and thank you all very much for your time. Marcella, I will hand this back over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Megan. And thank you to everyone that is here. It's a pleasure to have you join us today, and also just really grateful for your active participation. I also want to just underscore the feedback is very important to LifeLabs and to us at Charter, so please be sure to fill it out. There are so many takeaways that I had from our session today. I think one of them being that hybrid problems aren't company problems. Like, this is how we are going to work. Flexible work is very much in the future. It is right now. And so thinking about it in the scale of like how more effectively can my team actually connect with one another, communicate with one another, seems to be a really great place to start. Additionally, some other things that stood out to me, just unclear norms. It's a good reminder just that our perception of reality might not be somebody else's. And so if we are not making things that are implicit, explicit, especially when somebody is maybe joining our team or lives in a different location, we are doing ourselves a disservice. And last but not least, breaking the plane. I know for one, it's something that I try to be really intentional about here at Charter. It really makes a difference. Pinging somebody and just being like, hello, give me this thing is awful. Please don't do it. Taking time to actually connect with them as a human being goes such a long way. So again, thank you so much, Megan, for your time, for your insights, for your knowledge, for your skillful facilitation. And before we close, I want to remind you that the very next Charter Skills Accelerator with LifeLabs Learning is on constructive conflict, which is a very important one, both at work and at home. And that's going to take place on September 20th. Here, back on Brand Live's platform, we're going to cover how to turn conflict into collaboration. So you can look out for an invitation from Charter when the registration is available. And just a note that if you've enjoyed today's sessions and maybe you've missed some of the ones from before, you can view them on the Brand Live site as well as via the link that is going to be placed into the chat right now. Again, thank you so much to our partners, Megan at LifeLabs Learning and Sam and the team at Brand Live. See you next time.